Welcome to show number 278 of the Art Junkies Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Amourette McDonagh. She started her welding journey back in college and then got into welding in the Nascar circuit, and now she's doing research and development for NASA to weld in outer space. She's currently working on developing different processes to be able to weld, fabricate, and repair in orbit. There's more to the process of space welding than you would think. We're going to get right into her story after a quick word from our supporters. Today's episode of the Art Junkies Podcast is brought to you by Outlaw Leather in Pasadena, Texas. Outlaw is family-owned and operated and makes the coolest custom hoods in the game. There's a lot of copycats out there making custom hoods, but unlike other custom hood makers, Outlaw puts your safety up front. That's why their hoods are designed and built to meet ANSI Z87.1 and CSA Z94.3 requirements. Get the look you want and the quality you expect from Outlaw Leather. Each piece is hand-built in their facility in Pasadena, Texas. In addition to custom hoods, Outlaw makes custom arm pads, bolt bags, belts, scabbards, and more. They also carry everything you need to tackle your current or your next job, like welding consumables, hand and power tools, welding rods, and more. Can't make it to the storefront location? No problem. Hit them up at outlawleather.com and shop from the comfort of your home and get fast, easy shipping on all your orders. And as a special bonus for listeners of the Art Junkies Podcast, you can save 15% on all in-stock handmade leather goods when you use Art Junkies in the discount box at checkout. That's outlawleather.com. We're also brought to you by Rockmount Research and Alloys. Rockmount carries all the goodies to tackle all of your maintenance welding needs and get the job done right the first time, every time. Rockmount has a rod and wire for every type of maintenance welding that you're doing. Whether it's hard facing, repairing a cracked excavator arm, welding on skid plates, brazing on fittings, or welding to similar alloys, Rockmount has what you need. Check out their full line of products at rockmountwelding.com. Got a repair that keeps failing and don't know what to do? Not a problem. Just call up the Rockmount technical team at 1-800-272-7637 and they'll help to develop a solution. We all know downtime is the Achilles heel when it comes to equipment. Get your machines back to making you money with a quality repair with Rockmount. Their rods are specifically designed to help you weld stronger so your equipment can last longer. And as a listener of the Art Junkies Podcast, you can get a free 1-pound tube of Tartan AAA when you spend at least $250 at rockmountwelding.com by using AJP in the discount box at checkout. Get the job done right the first time, every time with Rockmount. We're also brought to you by Underground Metalworks. Are you looking to learn how to weld but don't have the time to commit to a 6-month program? Then check out Underground Metalworks in Orlando, Florida. We have a program to fit every schedule. We're offering week-long comprehensive classes, nighttime sessions, weekend MIG and weekend TIG classes, as well as custom one-on-one training classes. The training center opens July 17th and kicks off with a full week of comprehensive classes taught by yours truly. Classes are filling up quick, so make sure to secure your spot by going to underground-metalworks.com or by clicking on the link in the show notes. All right, you know what time it is. Fire up your machine, drop your hood, and turn me up 5.
You're listening to the Art Junkies Podcast, helping you make every weld better than your last with each episode. And now your host, Jason Becker.
All right, Amourette, welcome to the Art Junkies Podcast.
Thank you for having me, finally.
Yeah. No, it was funny because like we talked a while ago and I had to sign an NDA before I could talk to you. So I wasn't sure. I was like, well, if I bring on the podcast, like what could we really talk about? But some of the stuff you're doing is really fascinating as in regards to like welding in space and, you know, like the whole aeronautical type of, bringing blue collar into that world.
Yeah, I didn't really mean to get into it, but NASA is really trying to bring in-space manufacturing and make it a reality. And they're doing some of it on the ISS already, and they're ready to level up, especially because they're going to deorbit the ISS and kind of retire it. But also, there's a bunch of junk up there that needs to be cleaned up. And welding's kind of front lines of scrap recycling. You know, fabrication, you can cut up the metal and melt it and reuse it. And a lot of it's already up there and it's very valuable. Mm-hmm. So there's different projects they're trying to do, like salvage all the satellite scraps, deorbit stuff that doesn't need to be there, and then reuse what they can because it's already up there.
Now, how do you deorbitize the International Space Station? Are they
They're gonna drop it in the ocean, just like Skylab.
Geez, how big is this thing?
Yeah.
Because I mean, like,
So
people
I
are living
know-
up there. Like, people are making trips.
Yeah.
Us and Russia, and like I know
Yeah.
Russia was our Uber for a while when they shut NASA down, a few years back.
I know it's bigger than the reentry vehicle or the reentry rocket, that little tiny one I'm standing in front of at White Sands on my Instagram. But I went to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center and Skylab. I mean, standing next to it, that's the one they had before the ISS in the 70s, that all the original welding in space experiments were done by Russian cosmonauts, actually. A female was the first one to weld in space, ironically.
Oh, that's cool.
Which I think it's really cool. I get that, you're going to be the first female to weld in space. And I said, actually, someone beat me to that one, which is really cool. But they dropped Skylab into the ocean and they shipped it to Huntsville, Alabama. So you can go visit it at the Rocket Center. I mean, it's pretty big. And then when I got invited to NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, and I got to see a capsule. I think I have a picture of it on my welder Instagram. It's pretty big. I mean, they can walk around in it and house all the equipment. There are these huge pods, bigger than a semi, I'd say, but a circular shape. But they have one of the pods that they test in at Marshall that I got to go see, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that's neat.
But they're big, but I know the ISS has a couple different pods, and I only saw one of them, but I think there's like 6 or 8 floating around up there together. So they connect the pods and they do different things, and they have tunnels connecting them.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen pictures or anything of it. And
yeah.
So I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know much about space.
Not a lot of people do.
Yeah, I went to NASA last year on a field trip with my kid. That's about as much as I know.
Did you get to go to Kennedy?
Yeah, we went down to Kennedy Space Center.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I was there last June, I think, I got invited to an Artemis meeting. I don't know how I was invited because it was me and like 98% NASA. But I had a lot of really good conversations, and every single person there said, "Oh, you're a welder. We really need welders around."
That's always a good
feeling. It was. And I feel like that's why I was there, because I know Marshall Space Flight Center, they actually just lost one of their welders that has been there for a long time. I got to meet him when I was there. I think his name was Jeff. He passed away since I met him. And they're actually hiring, I think, but you have to have a bachelor's degree to work at NASA.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even if you're like a really good welder, it doesn't matter. You need like the scientific side of things, which I mean, kind of makes sense in that, industry, to know about physics and the space environment. But I learned a lot from the lunar base team. I was invited by NASA to join. It's a mouthful, so I call it my lunar base team, but it's called the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium. And I guess they did something similar in the 90s, and that's how we got the ISS. So they thought, let's get the community together and we'll try to work together to build a base on the moon. So that's where I get to go to those, like White Sands. That was a lunar base team meeting. And they let us go there. And then we got to go to Fort Bliss. And I got to see the 3D printed military barracks. They were like 3D printing concrete, but there were still welders out there for all the rebar that they had to weld together before they put the concrete in.
Oh,
So
you meant like
I was out on this military base.
They're doing it for here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're starting it at Fort Bliss.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I've seen
the
them.
idea, I think it's a Icon.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen them do the 3D printed concrete. Like I scrolled through Instagram one day and they were just like 3D printing with it. And I was like, that's pretty damn slick. But I thought it was just a concept. I didn't know they're actually putting that stuff to use right now.
They are actually. They're building it at Fort Bliss military base.
That's freaking
So
cool.
I couldn't take pictures of it, but it was really cool to see them 3D printing concrete.
Yeah.
It honestly looked like frosting.
Yep.
Just lots of brown frosting, and but yeah, it was cool because they still needed the welders even though it was 3D printed concrete. But that company is hoping to build a base like that on the moon. But either way, I do think additive manufacturing will be essential. I think it's going to be, we're going to send a rocket up and build kind of a structure by itself before we even send anyone up to go like live like the ISS. And that's one of the things that I've been telling the LSIC team, like we really need to focus on the welding because we can't do anything without it. And even I think it's Werner von Braun who developed the space program in Huntsville. He said like welding is essential to rocketry. We can't do anything without it. I mean, the rockets are welded together. A lot of the parts are welded, but even in space, we're going to need it for in-space repair, maintenance,
Hmm.
and melting and reusing it. That's all like welding and manufacturing.
Well, I think when Elon that just with SpaceX, he just launched a 3D printed rocket,
Was that what it was?
or did that one get postponed? I know it was supposed to go up, it got postponed, but I don't know if they've done a relaunch since. But they did a 3D printed rocket out here at the at Cape Canaveral.
Is that the one that blew up the other day?
That might have been it.
Okay. Honestly, there's so many rocket launches.
Well, he's
keep
doing
track of it.
what is it, 2 per month for the entire year, or
Yeah.
something crazy? Because he's doing the
I
Falcon
know.
9s and then the Falcon 9 Heavies.
Yeah. I know it broke the launch pad, and I'm pretty sure I heard them when I was at White Sands. They were testing a rocket engine, and I don't know whose it was, but I'm thinking it was his because they didn't get to go because of that. But we couldn't film it or anything. Just the sound of the rocket would have been like against the law. I guess somebody could figure out what it is. I'm
Probably.
sure those motorheads. Yeah, exactly.
So how'd you get wrapped up into all this? I mean, because like you're pretty early on in your welding career, and now you're working with
I
all
am.
these NASA engineers, and
Well, I guess let me start from where it really started. I went to college when I was 16, and by the time I was 19, I got my first degree, and I built a rocket for Mitchell Community College the first time I was there. I had a teacher, his name was Dr. Knight, and he's still to this day one of like the most influential people in my life, and he was my physics teacher. And it was his idea to do the rocket team, but I was such a space nerd. I was all about it. And I became the project manager. I was like 17 or 18 years old, I think, maybe 19, I forget. I was pretty young, and we built this rocket and launched it in a sod farm in South Carolina. And it did really well enough that he presented it to NASA. And we got the only community college in the country to get the NASA USLI project, which is where you have a rocket team and they go to like compete at NASA. And that team won a couple times after I graduated. And those same people that like from the team I started went on to UNC Charlotte after I had to drop out. They started the rocket team there. And I recently found out that it became a winning rocket team at UNC Charlotte. In addition, I don't know if Mitchell won, but I know there's a display case full of rockets. And then they decided to stop the program, which kind of sucked. But UNC Charlotte kept it going.
now how
But
big was the rocket?
So this one was 10 and a half feet tall, and
damn.
we called it T-bar. So Dr. Knight named it the big ass rocket and presented it to NASA like that, which was hilarious. But yeah, so that's the semester I graduated Mitchell the first time. So I didn't like stay around to do the rocket team. And then the rocket team wasn't formed yet at UNC Charlotte. And then I went to UNC Charlotte for engineering and physics, and I got involved in precision metrology, actually. So I was working on transmission electron microscopes, scanning electron microscopes, and I was trying to build, ironically, an atomic force microscope, which was the goal of the project, which I ended up having to drop out, so I didn't see it to completion. But I did get to use some awesome microscopes, and it just, I guess, is where my interest in metallurgy came from. Like I found out about metallurgy through that before I even knew what welding was. And they would tell me, oh, this is used for welding, blah, blah, blah. Like this is how we test the welds or examine them and all kinds of other stuff, not just welding, but I noticed that they used it a lot for like they would do a weld and test it at the school. Or when I was doing my research on microscopes, a lot of the metallurgy would come up. And then I did machining and I did thermodynamics. And I pretty much did almost up to the junior, senior level classes, except for the welding class. And then I had to drop out. And it was just one of those things I always regretted not getting welding. A few years went on, I decided to move to Colorado for a little while. And while I was out there, I did different things. And one of them, I got a yoga certification and became a yoga teacher. And I also wanted to explore renewable energy because I'm just passionate about just finding different ways to make energy and how can we do this. You know, I feel like turbines are really primitive and we've kind of stuck with them, but there's got to be alternative methods. So I just went out there because I know it's a big environment for that. They're really about that out there, like just windmills and solar panels. So I ended up at a biodiesel company just to try it out, you know, the biodiesel industry. And they had the welders there building all the tanks. And that's when I first got to try MIG welding. But then, of course, I I ended up not staying at that. It was honestly a terrible job. I won't say where it is, but eventually I moved back to North Carolina, and being where I'm from, I try to avoid racing, but it's literally impossible.
I was gonna say, you're right there in the middle of NASCAR country.
I know I'm wearing a NASCAR shirt, but I earned this one from my race team. I built the car that won this championship.
Oh, nice.
But anyways, so I happened to be in my friend's race shop. It was like one night. I don't know. I'd always wanted to try TIG welding since I tried MIG, and I just finally tried it, and I loved TIG immediately. I just fell in love, and then I stopped and I said, you know what? I was going to take this in college, and I know it's one of those things like you basically have to have the skill of like a surgeon to kind of be a welder. And I really just want to learn the right way to do it. So I went to Mitchell like a week or two after that. And I just said, what would a class be? Let me just poke the bear.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out it was like $400 or $500 for a semester. And I knew that welding is so expensive. It was so reasonable. I said, I mean, this is like stealing welding. Like I am going to spend way more in metal and gas than this tuition. And what I would have to spend trying this on my own, just taking a stab at it, like I think I would have spent way more than much money. So I went and I did TIG one. No, I did stick one first. I think I did stick, cutting metal, and like TIG or blueprint reading. And then I loved it. I couldn't stop going to class. I showed up early every day. I fell in love. And then I had 2 more classes. So I did 3 classes. And then the next semester I did 2 classes. And then I got my 1-year certification. And then because of my first degree I got when I was a teenager, I had 6 classes left. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'd be stupid not to get my welding technology degree with 6 extra classes.
Yeah.
That's really nothing compared to like for a whole nother associate's degree. But part of it was because I already had 1 associate's degree. So I had all those like, the English and the math already taken.
Mm-hmm.
But then that summer, it was one of those things where they had just a normal class for fabrication 101 or whatever. And the next summer they were building a smoker trailer. And since I've always wanted to delve into building a self-sustainable travel trailer with my renewable energy concepts, I thought, let me wait a year and do that one. So I kind of took the summer off, traveled a little bit, did my thing. And then by the fall, I went back to school, and somehow they got this NASA aerospace scholarship, like letter or email, and they nominated me to do it because of the rocket. So this is like 10 years later. I'm back at the school. I walk upstairs, and that's when I saw my rocket in the display case. And I literally like almost dropped my drink, I think, because I'm just walking, through to see my welding instructor, and I like did like a triple take. Like, is that my rocket? I kind of assumed it had been sitting in like, the corner somewhere collecting dust, but they literally put it in a display case. And I was just a very proud moment, just seeing my big ass rocket up there in this display case with all the other rockets that came after it in a row. But yeah, it was cool that they were able to do that. Even UNC Charlotte doesn't have theirs in a display case like that anyway. But anyway, so I said, yes, sure, I'll write it. It was like, write a paper, and if you win, they'll pay for a trip to NASA. And I was like, oh no, twist my arm. Like,
right.
That sounds awesome. Sign me up. So I decided to do energy harvesting and welding in space concepts. As a welder in welding school, I thought, well, what are they doing with welding in space? And one thing just led to another. And I was like hours into a rabbit hole that turned into a little 9-page paper. I don't know. Have you read my paper?
I didn't know about it. No.
Okay. I'll have to send it to you. So I did more than just welding. I also did like, how can we harvest energy? Like for one thing that I want to try is I think it'd be funny to try for the race team too, but you know how you can make a gym into harvesting energy?
Make a gym?
Yeah. So like a bicycle and a treadmill. Yeah.
No, I'm not.
So I put those ideas into that paper. Like there's gyms in Europe where the people like they work out and like they power everything.
Oh, okay. Gym, like
yeah,
G-Y-M,
a gym, yeah,
J or J or G-E-M. Damn, I can't spell.
No, not a gem.
M-O-O-N. That spells moon. Somebody will get that joke.
No, but like for instance, NASCAR has the pit crews,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it'd be funny if like they harvested energy off the pit crews working out because they work out so much. It's like mandatory. Like if you're on a race team on a pit crew, I was in finish vab. So I was in the shop and I wasn't pit crew, so I didn't have to. I liked to work out in the gym and all, but They have to work out like 1 to 2 hours a day. It's like part of their contract. And I'm just thinking this is a bunch of energy going to waste, But so I put ideas like that into my paper, but also the fact that, and it's not just me that has said this, cold welding happens naturally in space. Literally, it's the perfect conditions and it's the right temperature, and there's no oxide layer. And if you smack two pieces of metal together, essentially, they cold weld. One example was the Galileo antenna, I think. The rocket went up and all the vibrations like cold welded the antenna shut, and they couldn't deploy their technology because it welded itself shut.
Oh, wow.
So they have had, there's a lot of research that goes into preventing cold welding with coatings. It's like all those satellites up there have these coatings on them to prevent them from cold welding.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you put like a ceramic coating or something on there like that, I mean, that would prevent the two surfaces from mating.
Until it breaks off, which is going to break off eventually. But when you're dealing with rocket level, those forces when they're launching, a lot of it's launching because once you're up there, it's smooth sailing. But during the launch is when a lot of it happens. I think they had the similar problem. It was one was a solar panel didn't deploy. One of them was an antenna didn't deploy for like a radar probe where they were trying to get like the sounds of the universe or something. And then the other one was a shuttle door. So they even used dissimilar metals to try to prevent it, and it's still the dissimilar metals welded themselves together, and they couldn't get the door open. Yeah, that's how easy cold welding is in space. But to me, I'm like, that sounds amazing. You telling me you can create a weld by doing this?
Yeah, if you can figure out how to do it intentionally, because I've always wondered that.
Right.
Like I've heard, yeah, if you're up in space and you smack two pieces of metal together, like they'll stick and they'll stay together forever.
Yeah.
Like nobody's ever like proven that to be correct.
Well, they've had a couple instances, like I said, the antenna, the solar panel, but they have done so much work trying to prevent it. And even the research I did, because I ended up eventually down the road, I got a Space Force research grant. So I got to read all the old documents, and they all, even in the 60s, were saying we need to investigate this as a welding technique. And they did a bunch of tests, like these combinations work, these don't work. Like these ones kind of weld together. So there are certain metals that are, have more of a tendency to weld together, and some of them don't weld at all. But I just think that sounds like room for opportunity.
Yeah, that'd be kind of neat. I mean, if you could do that like intentionally, if you're up there trying to weld, and but I wonder, it'd be kind of cool. Like the weld nerd side of me wants to go up into space and just start slapping pieces together and then come back and start doing some destructive testing on it and be like, okay, what's the, if I smack these together and there's not real fusion that's taking place, it's not really penetrating, how much force does it take to pull them apart? Can we do like a bend test on the, some of this stuff?
That's exactly what I'm trying to do. But they actually have done a lot of those tests. I don't know if they did it in space, but they did it in a vacuum.
Okay.
And I don't think cold welding is not as affected by gravity as, say, arc welding would be with the metal pull flow. Because they did a metals melting experiment, and then they did a bunch of cold welding tests. And one of the documents that I went through literally listed out, this is like the nanometers or nanonewtons or something it took of force to get these to cold weld. And they all had different rates that they would weld at. But no one's tested them. No one's refined it into a technique, which is one of the big things that I put into that paper. But also there's a lot of just the space environment is very unique because it's a vacuum, and it just has a lot of things going for it that are already conducive to welding. I mean, when I'm TIG welding, when I'm using gas when I'm welding in my shop, I'm trying to prevent the atmosphere from getting to it. And they even have those inert gas chambers where they purposely fill the chamber with gas to prevent the atmosphere from hitting.
So I was going to say, like, once you get past, if you're in a spaceship or whatever, and you get outside of the Earth's atmosphere, you're essentially in a purge chamber. Yeah. It's an inert environment, right?
Yeah. Yes. So, and they have done tests. I'm pretty sure they did TIG welding. So there's IVA and EVA. And IVA is staying inside the vehicle, and EVA is extravehicular activity. So the Russian cosmonauts, they did it's called the M551 metals melting experiment on Skylab. But they actually did fusion welding in space. I think they tried basically TIG, MIG, PAW, and then electron beam and laser. And electron beam and laser show a lot of promise, but they can only do really thin stuff.
Yeah.
So they're limited as to what they can do it well, but it's also too bright for the astronauts to be using. But that was in the 70s. The laser welding that I saw this week at the Southern States Steel Expo was, I mean, a lot better than I think it used to be, or a lot more reasonable for somebody to stare at while they're trying to weld.
With doing laser?
Yeah.
Well, so I think you just need like infrared lenses. I mean, you could probably set something up on like an astronaut's helmet, very similar to what they do when they dive, when they do underwater welding. They've just got like the lens just kind of flips down and it blocks out enough of the view to where you can actually look through that. Because I was talking to Bill Farmer 2 nights ago. I went to the North Central Florida. They put on their AWS section meeting. It was a demo night. And I was talking to Bill Farmer. He's like a really smart dude, high up with air gas and everything. Just awesome guy. But he was talking about, a lot of these different lasers, putting them in the handheld application, what that's doing, because it's far brighter and more intense than, the arc rays that we deal with shielded metal arc welding, gas metal arc welding, tungsten, like all that stuff. It's a lot brighter, but you really don't see it because there's not like a whole lot of sparks and everything going on, but the infrared being generated, it's much worse on your body. So you can't just wear like sunglasses. You got to put on like the IR shades and all that stuff. And then same thing with the clothing, because all that stuff can penetrate. So, I mean, like you want to like get thicker garments or whatever. Like I'm sure there's going to be a lot more safety that's coming down now that laser welding is becoming a lot more prevalent. But like you said, it's really only meant for like thin gauge materials. So like we're talking like sheet metal, gauge thickness stuff. It's not going to be like 3/16 or anything bigger than that.
Right. And I know like in space metals are usually lighter, but the lunar base is probably going to be a totally different story. And also the moon has dust, as where the ISS is dust free. So yeah, the moon's a vacuum and it has, I think, 1/6 the gravity of Earth, but it's dusty, and dust is obviously a huge problem in welding. But the playing field is totally unknown. Like we don't know what the baseline is going to be for anything. Like there's no standards. And I think that's a big thing that the LSIG team is trying to do. They're trying to create standards and take, everything, the information from the community and like lessons learned, what they're working on, what they need. And then they bring it back to NASA and some kind of white paper that they put out. It's actually kind of cool. Like those meetings I do, we get to learn about the space environment and then meet people that are also technology for space, and then how we can work together. Like for instance, I have people that want me to test lunar regolith metal powder that's been extracted through electrolysis. So it's like aluminum powder. But like, how are they going to melt that down and weld it on the moon?
Yeah.
Because that's what they're trying to do, is take the regolith and get the oxygen out, and then the metal powder will be used for a base. And like that is all welding and manufacturing,
I got to link you up with Bill Comlos and what's the guy's name? They call him Magic Tony. I think it's Tony Sanchez. I had both of them on the podcast, but Bill Comlos is the one that wrote the welding procedure specification for some like 0.45 diameter lines that were on the Perseverance, the Mars rover. So he wrote the procedure, and then Tony is the one that actually performed the welding. But it was like a man-made powdered type metal is what they were welding. So I'll have to hook you up with those guys.
Okay.
And then I think, damn it, I think I want to say Bill's out of Colorado area, and Tony is out of New Mexico, I believe. Or either that or Utah. He might live in Utah, but I think he's also got a house in New Mexico. But yeah, I'll have to put you in contact with them. They're super, super smart people. Bill's done a lot of stuff for NASA and Department of Defense and stuff throughout his career.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I went to New Mexico for the first time for that white sands trip.
Yeah, how was that?
Cool. There was no white sand. Oh, it was epic, honestly. So the first time I went to NASA was Marshall Space Flight Center. Like, actually got to go on the military base. Had to get like military clearance. Had to go through the guards. When I went to Kennedy, I was just at the visitor center. I didn't get to do anything like extra cool. But then for that, this was the week before FabTech too. So I went from Texas basically to I went from North Carolina to Connecticut to see my grandpa has cancer. So I was up there, flew out of New York City, flew to Colorado for like the day, saw some of my old friends, flew to El Paso, Texas, drove to New Mexico for white sands, came back to the LSIC meeting at the University of Texas, El Paso, which is where they hosted it. And then we went to the Fort Bliss military base to see the 3D printed barracks. And then the whole day is filled with technical talks, but also people from the industry and people from NASA are there. So it's different people's presenting. Like you'll see everything from a space lawyer to a satellite maker to like communications to just, I want to do like, I don't know, or put a radio on the other side of the moon, like people doing that kind of project. But they need like welders to fabricate the thing that's going to be on the side of the moon or the other side of the moon. And then we got to, oh yeah. So the mayor of El Paso heard the NASA LSIC team was coming into town, and they decided to host a catered Mexican dinner with a mariachi band at the UTEP Aerospace Center. And it was right on the Texas-Mexico border. And we got to watch the sunset over Mexico with a mariachi band. And some of the best Mexican food I think I've ever had.
That's pretty cool.
It was stunning. Yeah, actually, I have some video. I'll have to post it. I don't think I did. Ironically, when I was on the bus going to see the mariachi band on Route 10 in Texas, guess who passed me on the highway? But none other than Stewart Haas Racing. So I'm like literally in Texas, not even on the race team anymore, on the way to see this mariachi band. When I see I think it was the 41 hauler and the 10 hauler going to one of the West Coast races. Like the odds of that were pretty crazy. So I went to DC for the spring LSIC meeting, and I made a joke on my way up there. I said, watch me get see another race hauler. It's kind of funny. So I bought a camera because I go on all these trips now, and I thought it'd be fun for content, which I haven't done too much yet, but I did actually get video on the way back, and I got the 4 hauler passing me this time on my NASA trip. I just thought that was ironic.
Yeah. I never see race car haulers.
Well, do you know what to look for?
I don't.
Okay. No,
That's
once you know what to look for, you can't unsee them. Like I'm from Mooresville, and a lot of the teams are headquartered here. And you can just tell when they're all leaving because it's like you'll see one and then you'll see 10 more. You're like, oh, there's another hauler. They're going to the race. So they're all leaving their shops, getting on 150, and then they get on 77 or 85, and they all ship out. It's like a circus, honestly.
I have seen circuses driving down the road. They're all like folded up. Like I know what to look for when I'm seeing a circus, and just not with NASCAR, I guess. Yeah.
No, honestly, like I see them all the time, but I also know what to look for. Like I know my hauler when I see it. Like, I know, like I could see a Stewart Haas race hauler out like 10 miles away and probably know that was it. But I also worked there for a few years. But no, like today I was stuck in traffic on 77, and I think I saw Arca or Xfinity leaving because they weren't Cup Series, but they were definitely race teams. And the whole highway was just slammed with race haulers. But it looks like a semi with, like I said, it looks like a race car. It's got the number, a bunch of sponsors.
Oh yeah,
they usually travel.
Stand out.
It does. I mean, if you didn't know what a hauler was, like a race hauler was, you wouldn't know to look for it. But once you know, you'll probably start seeing them. Especially like if Daytona was in town, you'd notice them coming in a little more.
Probably, yeah. To get to Daytona though, like I got to get all the way out to the west side of the state. I'm in Central Florida, so I mean they're just up and down 95 and all that.
Yeah, but Mooresville is just weird like that because all the teams are here, and they all leave around the same time. Like they get the car done and then they head to the race. But sometimes 150 will be backed up with just race haulers just leaving town.
Yeah. I prefer to go to the west side of the state, but so last time I went to Daytona was for Welcome to Rockville. I got to see Metallica in concert, Rob Zombie. That was pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, I remember last time I went to Florida, I was seeing Tool.
Yeah, you were in Miami watching Tool, and I was there like the night after, or the night before, seeing him in Orlando.
I think it was the night before. Yeah, that was fun. I tried to stop by that trip, but I think you were busy.
Yeah, I think that's when we were setting up the new school.
The new school? Oh,
yeah, the Orlando.
The new school.
No, not my new school. The new school for my previous employer.
Oh, yeah. Congratulations, by the way. That's a big deal.
Thank you. Dude, I cannot wait to get this thing up and going. We're doing installation tomorrow, so that should be fun.
Fun.
Yeah, fun. And then we got another company coming in to do the drywall. But yeah, it should be a blast. I'm really looking forward to it. Everything's just falling into place.
Awesome.
You have to come check it out once if you get free time in all your travels, or FabTech when FabTech comes to Orlando in 2024.
I love coming to Florida. I tend to spend a lot of time there. I haven't been this year because of all my traveling, but I'm hoping to go sometime this year. And if I'm down, I would love to see it.
Yeah, hit me up. Come on down.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I know. That's just trying to get like schedules aligned for everybody.
Yeah. So you're just doing the school now and the podcasting?
Yeah, the school, the podcast. I'm taking all the welding consultations and all that stuff I've been doing, and I'm going to roll that into the school. So it's all going to fall up under that umbrella.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, it's really exciting. I actually got a shop. I didn't have a shop last year. I was just kind of doing a lot of research. And then I had my welder. There's a guy called Kevin Mall, and he owns Champion Tire. He provides all the tires for pretty much most of the race cars. But he has a facility in Cornelius, and I had my welder there. But when I got my new welder, I had more than outgrown the space. And I was looking for another shop anyway because I wasn't comfortable there, but it was like a nice start. And this guy had me doing some springs occasionally. But they're kind of a business incubator, and they were trying to take all whenever the Gen 7 car came into NASCAR, they fired all the welder fabricators. And a lot of the teams have a lot of good equipment and stuff like that. And they were just trying to channel all the skill and the people into something else because it did a lot of damage to this town, honestly.
That's what I've heard a lot about that.
It sucks, honestly. Watching
Tom Patsis from Cold Hard Art was talking about that, how they're switching everything over.
Yeah. So I've been in Mooresville since 2001, pretty much right after Earnhardt died. And I have seen this town go from like people camping up and down Route 3 to like nobody comes like they did back in the 2000s for racing. Like race week used to just be madness. People would camp just on the side of the road next to the Waffle House just to be in Mooresville. And even like where my shop is, there is a sign that I love seeing because it says caution race fans ahead. And there's like signs are all over Mooresville. They just crack me up. But it used to be a serious thing. Like you would drive down that road and it would be like a swarm of people just trying to go to this race team. But over the years, also the Gen 6 car had a lot of safety. They took years of wrecking cars and turned it into a machine that they can hit the wall at 200 miles an hour because of how like really the chassis absorbs everything. They try to put it into the chassis instead of the driver, like the impact.
Yeah, it's because it's like a new standard now, right?
Yeah, so NASCAR makes everything and sends it to them. And then whoever makes the motor sends them the motor and they just kind of put it together. But honestly, for me, that takes a lot of the thing that I like about racing, because you could take a bunch of good old boys in a shop, or women too, obviously, see what they can do with the metal. Because if your welds suck, it doesn't matter how good of a driver you are. The car is just not going to be as good. But if you have a team of top-notch fabricators that put together a really good car and then you match it with a good driver, I mean, that is what I think I like about the sport. It's like a blend of, metal and people coming together. It's more than just the driver. Like my welds were in those cars and my welds are different than somebody else's, and how they make the car is a little different from how the other team makes the car. Like even at Stewart Haas Racing, there were 4 cars and I had a different set of prints for like each car, or like set of specs that I had to build it to for the driver's preference for what kind of race it was. And now it's like they've just taken all the fun out of it. And I don't know. Earnhardt is probably rolling in his grave over this car.
Probably.
I feel like. I don't know, because he used to build his cars from scratch. So it does make a difference. If your team can't build the car and you have a good driver, like you're going to suck.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool about racing. Like, yeah, there's a lot of left turns and circles, but to the teams, it's way more than that. It's like those little welds in every piece of metal you cut and hand fabricated. Like you hands make like a $500,000 race car. I mean, you take that seriously. At least I did.
Yeah, it's kind of a big deal.
It is, but we do it differently than the next team. But they've just taken that away. I'm like, that just takes all the fun out of it for all the people building the car.
I wonder if they're doing that for safety, or I wonder if they're doing that for a monopoly now that NASCAR actually provides. They're like, okay, we run the rules, and you're also going to have to buy your frame directly from us.
Well, they did it to prevent a lot of the cheating. But cheating's part of the sport. It's like, how can we make this car work for us or make it more aerodynamic? I mean, they would build that car and go test it in the wind tunnel, come back, make us make changes. Or like they would switch up the rules and then we'd have to switch the car. It's like I could have had 6 months of work prepped out and then NASCAR changes one rule and I have to go back and redo all that work. But that was kind of what was fun, you know? Yeah, not anymore, but think about safety with the new car. I think safety was last. I know safety was not first. But they had so much into it, they couldn't turn it back. And they're just going with it. I mean, it looks really cool, but I don't think it's the same. And I think World of Outlaws is becoming a more popular sport because it's just a lot more chill. It's a bunch of people. Just how can we whip up this cool race car and then pair it with a good driver? It's not, oh, I'm going to send you a trophy car and put a motor in it and hit the gas. Like, I don't know. That just takes a lot of the fun out.
Yeah. My ironworker buddy, Don Watson, was huge into World of Outlaws. Probably still is. I haven't talked to him in a while, but that was like his jam because they go out there to Bithlow and they race all the time down here in Florida. And like, that's his thing, man. He never misses a race.
Yeah, I can see it because it's fun. It's like edgy and it's, you know, the cars are really what make it racing. It's not just the driving around in circles, at least for me. And I think anyone who builds a race car feels exactly the same way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent there, whether you're the driver, whether you're the fabricator, the pit crew. I mean, it takes an entire group of people to succeed. It's not, it's not just like one person on race day. I mean, there's a lot leading up to it.
There is. And I honestly miss the race team because you could just roll the car in and it looked like a pit crew. Like when you see them at the races, jumping on the car, it was like that, but nobody can see it like behind the scenes. But that car would roll in and we all had our job and we would jump on the car, get in, get out, get it done, like get the next car. And it was cool seeing us in action. And then it rolls out, you know, to be painted or wrapped. And it was a really cool experience. Like one time the monster truck came through and they fit that with the haulers because it wouldn't fit in the shop. So it was just a monster truck. That's that picture on my Instagram. It's forget which one it is, that green one.
Oh, Gravedigger?
Gravedigger, yeah.
Have you seen some of the welds on the Gravedigger chassis?
No, I was too busy climbing.
We got like the pit passes and everything, and like I went to probably since like 1992. I used to go to Monster Truck every year because they're always here in Orlando.
Yeah.
And you know, like I started taking my kids and everything. The past couple of years we haven't gone. I almost went to the World Finals was last year, or the year before down here in Orlando, but that was when I went up to go see Underground Metalworks when Stephanie Hoffman had her grand opening. I had won tickets to the World Finals, and I was like, well, shit, that's the same weekend. I got to go see Steph. And I was like, yeah, I'll cancel on the monster trucks. I'll go up there and, you know, see Steph and, you know, her new shop and everything. But, I mean, they'll come back because they've done the World Finals here in Orlando like twice, so I'm sure they'll be back again.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so, like, we used to get the pit passes and everything, and I went back there one time after I'd started welding, gotten into welding and everything. I started looking at some of the welds on these trucks. I'm like, you can hide a lot of porosity with, you know, anodized coating and powder coats and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was cool. We had the whole race team there with our race team for like the whole day, and they did a whole photo shoot. We had to move all our cars so they could do like donuts. They made Kevin Harvick's car look like the Gravedigger.
Oh,
it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was like the #1 fan favorite car of the year too. It was just cool because like I built that car. And my welds were all up in it. So I don't know. It's just like my proudest race car, I think, was that car. And then, okay, so here's, I guess, a good example of why welding is important and just the chassis is important because, you know, we had like hundreds of race car bodies and they all have numbers. And I think it must have been 2020. It was this year we won this because we won so many races with the same chassis. And then we put another car out there and like we would lose. But every time we would run this one chassis, that car won every single race. It's like, I don't know what was good about it, but it was like the perfect car that year. And it just handled amazing. And Kevin won, I think, almost all of his races in that one body.
Now, I just
think it's interesting.
When you guys build those cars, it's all what you use chromoly tubing?
There's a lot that goes into a race car, all different kinds of aerospace materials. You have steel, you know, for the frame and stuff, but then there's aluminum parts. Sometimes it's carbon fiber. Sometimes it's titanium. Sometimes it's chromoly. So there was a lot of different things in there, which I loved because I wasn't just welding. I was doing, carbon fiber and all kinds of other stuff, plastics, composites. And then I was welding and building parts. And it was different all the time. I also got to help someone snapped a pit box in half. That was kind of cool. I guess they had so much weight in it that the tongue like literally ripped off the box. And I had to go weld that back together, stuff like that. I built all of the pit crew gear, the racks. That was the last thing I did there. But I also would do a lot of parts inside the engine, like just motor mounts. I did side skirts, exhaust stuff. And then I ended up in hard fab. Actually, the last thing I did there, they were building a chassis dyno. That was pretty cool. So the last project I was on was a chassis dyno. And then that's when they kind of like laid everyone off. But they actually still need welders too. It's kind of crazy. Like a lot of the welders quit. They saw it coming and they were dropping off like flies. But I stayed on because I'd only been there for a couple of years. These guys had been there forever and they just saw it coming and they would just jump ship and go find another job because they knew it was, a sinking ship being there. It's a sad day, honestly. It was like a mass exodus just leaving the building the day they let me go anyway. And they did try to keep me, but I had NASA call me already, and I had a feeling I needed to do my own thing because I wouldn't have been welding if I'd stayed. So I just wanted to keep welding and explore the welding and space stuff.
Yeah, it seems like there'd be a lot more, kind of jumping ship, getting into NASA. But I mean, how cool is that transitioning from NASCAR into NASA? I mean, that's a pretty cool step in the right direction.
But yeah, it really is. NASA actually tried to hire me, and then they were like, we didn't realize you don't have a bachelor's degree. Because I went to UNC Charlotte, but I had to drop out because I couldn't afford to keep going at the time.
How far are you away from completing your degree?
It's been over 10 years. I think there's like a time limit where I'd have to start over.
Oh, wow.
I was like a junior or a senior, but I just I had to stop going. And also it was just the right decision at the time. I couldn't afford it. And I did kind of need a break. It was a couple of different reasons, but money definitely was the biggest reason because it's hard to do engineering school. I was paying for it myself and I was working like 2 or 3 jobs just to be in school. Mm-hmm. In engineering school, you just can't do that. I'd never slept. I was getting sick all the time. I was just so overstressed, overrun, overworked. It was just too much. I just broke. Like I just couldn't do it all anymore. So I took the break and then I came back to welding. And that's when I went back to welding school and I finished it no problem, but it was just a very reasonable situation. And Mitchell is a lot cheaper than UNC Charlotte. But I mean, if I get a chance, I probably would go back, but it's going to be a lot because I still don't have the means to just drop everything and go to college.
Right. If it does, happen, if the stars align or whatever, look into AWS grants and scholarships for welding engineering and, hop on over to like Ferris State or Laterno.
Actually, so being a part of the AWS, they saw my presentation. And actually, so my presentation was at UNC Charlotte and it was cool being there because I spent 2 years, working there, living there, trying to make my way there. And the guy who was, I think, the associate dean remembered me. And this was like 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that was cool being remembered as a dropout. Like they still remembered who I was. And they were really proud of me. And they even said, maybe we can get some kind of AWS grant. So that's been very fresh. That was like 2 weeks ago. But no, if it was the right situation, I definitely think I should go back. But I have a company now. So I have the space welding research that I'm trying to do. And the development side of things is the biggest, thing holding me back, getting what I need to do, what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And then now that I have a shop, so after I left First Turn Innovations, Bill Newell kind of adopted me. We went, actually, it's all your fault that I got this shop anyway.
Sorry.
Remember that?
I remember.
Oh, I know, right? Well, I asked you about Scott, I think, from Republic. And then one thing led to another. And then I called him and he said, you need to talk to Bill Newell. And then he started telling me all about Mooresville. And I was like, I live in Mooresville.
Hold on, man. I'm in Mooresville.
Stop by. He was trying to explain to me where Mooresville was. And I was like, oh, trust me, I know a thing or two. So that's how I went and met up with Bill at his shop. I think in December.
How convenient is that, though, that you're living in the same town as like one of the most brilliant freaking minds when it comes to welding in the world? Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll say it. Yeah, in the world. Bill's a freaking smart dude.
He really is. So I met Bill in August because the AWS called me and asked me to, like, they nominated me to be the secretary. And I guess the Charlotte chapter kind of, everything fell apart with the plague, like everything else. Yeah. And they're trying to rebuild it. But also Bill and Gary and Greg and Anvers have been doing this for like 20 years and they want to retire and pass the baton, but they want to do it right because, we have a really weak chapter. So they brought in Trent, Shannon, and I from Pitt Weld U. And then I don't know how they found me, but they did. And that's how I got involved. And they're trying to train us so we can kind of get newer people involved locally and rebuild the chapter, which we've been doing a lot of work, but I think it's paying off. Like, we're doing the welding competition tomorrow and it is much bigger than I ever could have expected it would be. The community really came together. I have a box of prizes. We got over $1,000 in gear just for the winning students. Edge donated some student, like, you're getting them too, I think, but they're the case with the starter set of cups and lenses. And I think it's worth $750. And then Arc 3 Gas, Pitt Weld U, and SRI is a local metal company, all donated welding hoods. So each winning student is getting the welding hood and the case with the cups. I guess whoever like really does the best gets $1,000 from the AWS.
Yeah, they do a lot of scholarships for winning competitions and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're doing it, because they have a lot of money for students that's not being used.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to kind of get them to use it. So this was our way of getting them to use it before they has to go back or whatever. But anyways, so I'm just really impressed because we put this together, not last minute, but we could have had a lot more time into it. But the community around us just threw gifts at us. We have tours of Quarter Mile Muscle, which is a classic car shop over by the drag strip. We really do. Like, this area is full. Actually, I was telling Ray this. I'm like, she said that she's kind of in no man's land for fabricators out in Big Springs. And I told her it's the opposite here.
I think she's in no man's land for a lot of things.
Exactly.
She's like
but
way
here,
out West Texas.
This is like the Hollywood of fabricators to some extent because of NASCAR, but also Charlotte is pretty industrious. And there's just a lot of shops. I mean, literally, I have 2 welders, a table, and like a toolbox. And then when I met Bill at his shop, he told me how he wanted to buy some welders and hire a welder to put in his shop. And I thought that's kind of how it happened. He was like, well, I need some welders here. And I was going to invest in the equipment. And I told him that I have 2 welders sitting there collecting dust that I can't even plug in to the FTI and nowhere to go with them. So that's how I ended up at his shop. But it was a lot of work because he hasn't cleaned in like 30 years. So I was buried.
He hasn't needed to with consulting. He's not doing a whole lot of work in the back.
Yeah, but he likes to tinker. He loves to make stuff when he has time. He tries anyway. I've seen his welds though. He can talk about welding all day, but that man cannot weld.
Well, you gotta help him out. It's been a while. It's been a minute.
Well, that's why I'm there. I'm to help him with the welding. And I have actually done a couple things just around that they've needed. But it's also nice too, because I have like you said, one of the most brilliant people right there. So I can just go like, oh, hey, I'm doing this. And he just, oh, blah, 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 like goes off on a Bill tangent.
Mm-hmm.
And he is really smart. And I wanted to be around other welders, especially not having my race team. When I left, I've been kind of a free agent finding my way. But there I feel a lot more comfortable being around other welders. Because I know I don't have a lot of experience like you do. I mean, I wrote that paper when I was in school. And then it was 2 years went by, the 2 years I was on the race team, that it took NASA to call me and told me to get a lawyer over the paper that I wrote. And that's when I was like, I think I should take this seriously. But I didn't take it as seriously at first because I don't know, did not think it would get as far as it has. When I wrote that paper, if you had told me they would have been calling me and telling me to get a lawyer, like I would not have believed you.
No, what did they say you needed a lawyer for?
Second, to get a patent attorney.
Oh,
for my
okay.
ideas. That, the other stuff that we talked about.
Yeah,
So no one's really done it the way I want to do it, like specifically what I have in mind. No one's done it. And they told me that's why I need to get a lawyer.
that makes sense.
But also no one's refined cold welding into a technique. And I know that I didn't come up with that, but I think I've put together a decent plan on how I think it's going to work, which I think is really cool. And and nothing else, just some kind of protection because for the level that, yeah.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break. This segment of the Junkies Podcast is brought to you by Everlast Welders. Looking for a new welder or plasma cutter but don't want to break the bank doing it? Check out everlastwelders.com and get a quality machine at an affordable price and get peace of mind with your purchase from their 5-year warranty that comes standard on all Everlast IGBT inverters. They're currently running special pricing on the all-new Typhoon 230 and 330 stick and TIG machines with an all-new industry-first waveform to customize your aluminum TIG experience. Check them out today at everlastwelders.com and remember to use Arc Junkies in the comment section at checkout to get that free Nova foot pedal and TIG torch upgrade when you buy any machine that comes with a stock foot pedal. Everlast Welders. Weld mean, weld green. We're also brought to you by our friends over at Strong Hand Tools. They just put together some fantastic toolkits and tables that are on sale for a limited time. These kits include some of the most useful tools and tables you'll find around the shop, starting at 15% off with free shipping to the lower 48 in Canada. Check them out today at stronghandtools.com/promo. I've been using my Strong Hand table for the past 3 years and I love it. Just yesterday, I fabricated a custom sissy bar for a motorcycle, and my Rhino cart came in clutch for the entire build. Get your table and fixturing tools today at stronghandtools.com/promo. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, for those listening, she's got some stuff that she really can't talk about or explain. Like I said, when we first met, I had to sign an NDA just to talk to you, and there was a lot of things we couldn't talk about. But now there's certain things we can talk about, but there's some things that you want to protect yourself with, and rightly so, because if you send that information out to the masses, as with anything in the welding industry, as soon as somebody sees it, they're going to want to copy it or try and do it or get ahead of it before you can. So I mean that just makes sense. So yeah, hiring a patent attorney, getting an attorney, all that stuff for working with NASA. I mean that just makes sense.
So I guess let me backtrack to the NASA part of the story. So it was 2019, and I had gone through that fab class where I built the trailer, and then that fall, I think I was taking like TIG 2 and like MIG 2 and like stick 2. It was all my like final welding classes for my associate's degree, because the certification for the 1 year was TIG 1, stick 1, MIG 1, blueprints, and cutting metal. And then the next time it was the more advanced stuff like fabrication and all the second level welding classes. So that's what I was finishing up, and that's when I did the scholarship. So it's like October 2019, and I wrote the paper, and then I got it. And they were going to send me to Langley, Virginia to do a robotics competition, all paid for, in May of 2020. You guessed it. So, of course, and I had a really hard time finding an internship. So to get my degree at Mitchell, you have to do an internship. They don't allow you to graduate if you don't have industry experience, which is a good thing if it's easy to find a job. But I, as a girl, honestly had a hard time because some of the shops were like out in the middle of nowhere. And then some of them, I didn't have enough experience. Some of them were straight up like, we don't hire women here. And I am lucky I ended up on the race team because they were they're just awesome about everything, especially Stuart Haas. They're very like open-minded and forward-thinking for some of the race teams. But I tried one shop, and like I was there for like a week or two, and the guy's wife came in, and 20 minutes later was out of a job. It was just a huge punch in the face because I've actually had more women kind of block my way than I have guys. There's a lot of guys that give me shit, but most guys are pretty supportive, and like they really like seeing girls doing stuff like this, I've noticed. And they had nothing but stuff to teach me at Stuart Haas. Like I learned as much as I could from all those guys. And it was really nice. But then there were some shops like, oh, we don't allow women here, or my wife won't allow me to have a girl here, all kinds of things. And then I lost it because of that. So that whole extra year that I waited for that fab class to get an internship. And it was to the point where I didn't think I was going to get a welding degree because I was having such a hard time finding a shop. Or it was, one of those production like staffing jobs where you would be like MIG production welding. And knowing myself, I've had a lot of work experience. I've been working for a long time. And I know that I do better at a job when I really want to be there and I have a passion for it than just a job to have a job. Because that just shows like on my face if I'm miserable. I can't hide it. So I would have done that if I had to, but I just wanted the right situation. So I kept putting myself out there, kept trying for the right situation, and eventually it finally happened. And I ended up at Stuart Haas. And I told the guy who was my future boss, actually, I went to a bar with one of my friends and we had some drinks, and then he was there and they knew each other. And I had shots with him and told him kind of about the aerospace scholarship and how I was having a hard time finding an internship to graduate. And then he said, all right, well, you come down to Stuart Haas and we'll give you a weld test. And sure enough, like actually a few weeks went by. He had some family stuff happen in the middle, but I thought I thought they forgot about me, but it ended up being he had a horrible family situation. And then it was the holidays. On top of that, his son died.
Oh,
obviously
damn.
I'm like, take all the time you need. So I thought again, I thought I wasn't going to get it, but this time it wasn't because of me, it was because of that situation. And he eventually got back to me after he got through all that, because I met him when his son was still alive, and then it was like a week or two later he killed himself, and then they had to take time. So I forgot about it. I was like, I'm not going to graduate. It's like literally I've done all this work and I can't get the right spot. So finally they called me back and I got the internship, and I was like late to the game because it was a whole class. You have to take the class and do the internship.
Mm-hmm.
And like the person has to come visit the school. Like they had to inspect your job. It was a whole thing. So I started the class with no internship. Like I'm going to fail this because I don't have the internship, but I ended up getting it. I passed the weld test, and then I started work a week or two, a week right after that. I think it was the week after I weld tested. But it was 2020. And then it was like a few weeks later, everything shut down.
Yeah, the whole world shut down.
And then the whole semester got totally screwed up because I was supposed to graduate and I was going to have a nice graduation. And then I think I got my degree on a random day in September, just in the mail. That was my graduation. It was kind of sad. I do all this work just to get a degree in the mail. I was actually going to go to the graduation too. I thought, let me at least show up for my own graduation. And then I didn't even get the option to go.
They didn't do like a redo, be like, hey, yeah, we know like COVID came to town and like, screwed everything up, but we're going to hold it in, October, even though everybody graduated earlier this year.
Well, I was supposed to graduate in May of 2020, and they literally just sent me my diploma on a random day in September of 2020.
Damn.
Like that's how I got my diploma, just in the mail. So I did graduate, and then the NASA trip got canceled. And then they didn't quite know it. So they did this one-of-a-kind, unique virtual experience. So instead of paying to fly us to Virginia, they gave us money to do this 2-week virtual thing. So I was literally like, I would get up, just go to the race team. I'd work for a few hours, and then I'd have a couple hours on Zoom, chilling with like NASA people and astronauts. And it was kind of cool. They let me keep my background on. So it was like astronauts on the screen and like Daytona cars just rolling around in the back. And everyone was like, what is behind you? And I'm like, those are just race cars. Don't mind me. So I did the whole NKISS virtual experience. And then somehow this girl got a hold of my paper, read it, and sent it to the welding department of Marshall Space Flight Center. And that's how I really got involved. That was what did it, was that virtual NASA experience. So they sent it to the welding department, and they personally reached out to me. And then they said, we want to invite you to NASA over this paper to talk to you as soon as like lockdown's over. And that's 2020. So it was like another year had gone by. And I do think it would have happened sooner had it not been the plague.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously let's just forget a year and a half, 2 years of our life. Like,
oh, that screwed up my entire timeline, like mentally.
No, I call it 2019 BC.
There you go.
Before Corona.
Right.
Like, back in 2019 BC when the world ended, like as we know it. But yeah, so I was supposed to go to NASA and then I didn't, but then they invited me. And that's when like a year later, somebody else got a hold of my paper at Goddard. or NASA HQ up in DC. And they were the ones that called me and told me to get a lawyer over the paper and my concepts that I came up with. They said, you need to get a lawyer. And that's a funny phone call. People love this story. So I have like no life, and you're worried about someone calling me, but like no one's going to call me unless it's spam. Spam calls me all the time. And most of the time I ignore it because it's spam, unless I happen to know the number, which is rare that somebody I know actually calls me to like talk. So I was on the 10 car on this, like welding it up, doing my job, and my phone rang. And I just thought it was spam because I didn't know the number and I ignored it. And I forgot about it and it left a message. And like 2 days later, I go to check the message, full on expecting spam. I'm like, this is NASA calling you. And it's like, NASA? Like, what? Why didn't I check this message? But I wasn't expecting it to be NASA. But it was Friday by that point. So I had to go all weekend. Like, why did NASA call me? Like, why is NASA? Like, it was driving me crazy. So that Monday, I think I called them back. And that's when they said they really liked what I wrote. And they invited me to the OSAM conference. And I'd already been invited to NASA by someone else. And then this other person said, you should come to this conference. And that's the OSAM, where I learned about the on-orbit service assembly manufacturing that they're trying to do in space. All the things that I was talking to you earlier about. Mm-hmm. So I went and I told the guys at the welding department that I was going to go for this meeting. And they said, okay, we'll plan on being at Redstone Arsenal Friday. Like for the morning, we'll give you a tour and then we'll go to lunch. And it was great. So I went to the partnerships meeting, and that's where they have those technical talks. It's like LSIC, but a different side of it. This is before I was even involved on the lunar base team, but it's because of all this that I ended up getting involved. So I went and it was like 2 days of meetings at the Jackson Center in Huntsville. And my favorite part was when the welding department gets up and they do their whole welding in space talk. And this was honestly the moment I knew I was in the right place. And like, we really do need more welders. And this is why, because this guy gets up and looks NASA welding engineers right in the face and asks them how their ceramic welding is going. And I'm not going to say who, but the guy presenting like looked up, and I'm trying not to lose it. I was like, did somebody just ask them that? Like, really? Do they know what welding is? Like, clearly they don't. And I'm going through this in my head, but you could see it on his face. Like, if you were standing there, you would have known like exactly what this guy is thinking, because he looked up and he looked down again, and like he looked up and like took a breath and he was like, I think they make JB Weld at Walmart. That's what we use for welding ceramic. And I about lost it. I was like, you really had to tell this guy like what's like welding actually is, and that they don't do ceramic welding here at NASA. And he had to explain it to him. And I was like, I just can't believe someone asked that, but I can. But his face was priceless. And then the next day I got to go meet them, and I asked him about that. And he was like, did I do a good job keeping a straight face and keeping that one professional? And I was like, you did way better than I would have if someone asked me about that kind of like ceramic welding. Like, what? Could you imagine? I don't know if anyone does that, but I just thought it was crazy that someone asked them that.
You weld ceramics. You mold them and then you put them in a, like a fire and hard them up. But that's about all I know is ceramics.
Yeah. So with this guy, I was like, how's your ceramic welding going? Like it was a normal thing.
Like it was a thing. Like they were actually in the lab welding up ceramics. You can use ceramics as backroom material.
That's what he suggested.
Because it doesn't weld for shit.
Exactly. But I placed at the right time. So the next morning I got to go to Marshall Space Flight, and I got on the military. That's the first time I went on the military base. And I got to watch them weld up the Artemis rocket. And some of that video, I couldn't do too much videos, but they're on my Instagram. And I was standing underneath the rocket while they were like welding it up. And they were the biggest clamps I've ever seen. I don't know if that picture you've seen, it's like a bunch of blue things with the silver body. And it says MSFC weld tool up it's far away because it's so big. But those blue posts are literal welding clamps. Really? You know which picture I'm talking about?
No, I think I'm going to have to go back through your
I don't know. It's on my Instagram. Yeah. So that one picture is of the weld tool. Those are like 8-story tall welding clamps.
Jeez.
To clamp together a rocket body. Yeah, it was insane. And then there's one picture of me standing in front of like the shop door. Like the one at Stewart Haas was pretty big, but the one at NASA was like 8 or 9 stories tall. Now
Mm.
the one at the VAB in Kennedy is bigger, but the one at Marshall was, I mean, enough to fit parts of the rocket through, not the whole thing. I think that VAB can fit like the whole rocket.
Oh yeah, the VAB is freaking
Yeah,
massive.
it's not that big, but it was still like the biggest shop door I have ever seen. And like I looked so tiny compared to this door. But the weld clamps were about as tall as the door. I mean, 8 story tall blue welding clamps. Like those would not fit in my drawer.
No. Well, they say the
Um,
vehicle assembly building has its own like atmosphere on the inside to where it'll actually rain in the
oh
building.
yeah, I've heard that.
Just 'cause
Yeah,
it's
on
so
the
tall.
tour actually.
Yeah. It's pretty damn
They're
impressive.
not that tall, but they're pretty tall. Yeah. So I got to tour that, and then that's when I got to see the human habitation building where those pods that I was talking about earlier are. So they had like a replica of one of those tubes of the ISS, and I think there's 6 or 8 capsule things that are all connected, but they had just one capsule on the ground, and they had the water recycling machine and like astronaut pee everywhere. They had that on display. It was kind of gross, but I mean they have to recycle their pee to drink. But any
that's
equipment
fantastic.
they make,
You can't like throw a freaking case of Zephyr Hills in there for them or whatever. They got to drink their own
right?
piss. Jeez, come on, NASA.
I know we can do better, right? No, but I got to see the water or the pee recycling machine, and they had, I don't know if I have that picture. I'll have to post it, but it's literally a bunch of like cups of astronaut pee like on display
There's got to
because
be a
it's
better
scientific
way.
research that we pay for. I know. That's why they get paid so much, right?
I guess.
They drink their own pee. Yeah, I don't know if that's like, oh, do you want to be an astronaut? I'm like,
Yeah, no.
I
I mean, like, are you
would,
drinking your
but
own, or
that's
is it
the
like a
one
community pool, or
thing.
what?
I think astronaut pee recycled into water is cleaner than some people's water supply because it has to be, top of the line water for them to be drinking.
Yeah, I guess so.
And yeah, it's their pee, but it's cleaner. It's probably cleaner than what most people have to drink, like out of their faucet.
Yeah, I don't
It's
drink
a
my
mind
faucet
fuck
water.
for sure.
Right?
No, I have a well, so that's cool. But we have filters and stuff. But even that's probably dirtier than this astronaut water that they have to make.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I got to see the pod or whatever in real life, and then I got to see their machine shop. And honestly, Stewart Haas Racing was nicer than NASA as far as like equipment, and they're definitely primitive and kind of behind the times, but they haven't put money into the space program in so long. I think that's
Yeah.
part of it. But one thing I did get to see was they had a custom welder, which was really cool. And actually there was a guy that passed away since I met him. He showed me how to use it. It was some kind of special like TIG welding setup. They had just to build these rockets, and it had a huge long arm, and it was from like the 50s or 60s, and Miller made it. And it was just cool getting to see some rocket welding. And then they had the friction stir welder, which is a cold welding process. It's like a drill bit that ends up the seam. And yeah, I haven't done it, but that's what I got to see then was the friction stir welder. Seeing the custom welder, I got to kind of see it in action, but it wasn't making the rocket. That was the friction stir welder. And then I went to lunch with them, and then Blue Origin got there, and that's when they said it was okay for me to go on another tour that I wasn't supposed to be on. And that's when things got really cool because I wasn't supposed to be there. B, they let me stay. And then I got to see the Apollo rocket buildings where they built the original rockets.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the lead paint. They had not touched them since the 60s. And it was a really dreary day and rainy, and it looked so apocalyptic and creepy, and it was so cool. It added a lot. And then I got to see the rocket garden where they have all the old rockets.
Yeah.
And they don't take care of them as well as they do at the Space Center. They were just covered in hadn't been washed in 50 years. But it was still cool to see them, the whole military base. Redstone is an interesting place. Like the more you learn about it, at least I thought it was really cool because I think there's still live missiles like buried. They pretty much took everything hazardous and buried it there.
That sounds like the government.
Yeah. So if you go out into a field to do an experiment, you have to get clearance to like walk through the field to make sure you're not going to blow up a missile that's been sitting there for 50 years.
I hope they got signs put up.
Well, I think last time I was there, they said they were doing construction to try to eliminate more of that, but it's been sitting there for so long, like they just never did anything with it. They also said one thing I learned, I guess they're like hoarders of metal. They get all this nice metal and like stash it in the woods. Or the guy that died did that. So there's like really nice metal stashed out in the woods out there. That was funny. Now, okay, one cool story. When I was at the Artemis meeting at Kennedy, this guy was talking about the launch pad over there. I don't know, you may have heard this, but I guess there's a house over by where they launched the rockets at Cape Canaveral. And all the astronauts that have ever flown have a bottle of liquor in there that they all signed before they went up. And if they made it back, they got to go drink it and leave the empty bottle. And all the ones that, so all the ones that didn't make it back, there's still a bottle of liquor with their name signed.
Oh, wow. No, I hadn't heard of that before.
Yeah, so some guy at NASA was telling me that they do that. And it was just cool. I'm like, that's cool that they just like, it's like an old abandoned old house. No one's there. No one's allowed to be there because it's on the launch pad, basically. Yeah, I guess it's an astronaut edition. The guy telling the story, I was really thankful to be hearing that.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that because I did the tour, like I said, a couple months ago, but I didn't hear about that.
Tour that was at the meeting with all the NASA people the Artemis meeting that I was invited to. Somebody from like NASA told me the story about, because I guess he gets to go with them to the launch pad or something, and he works for NASA, and he was telling us. That's what's cool about going to these other meetings that I go to is it's more than just a visitor center. So like I did go to the visitor center and learned a lot, but a lot of these stories are from people at NASA that like you don't normally get to hear.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, so it's just cool like hearing about how they do that little tradition. But it's sad because there's a couple bottles still full with the names.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a bunch of empty ones, so that's good.
Yeah, more empty's good.
But I mean, I can imagine like wanting to come back to a bottle with my fellow astronauts. Like, we made it, guys. Yeah. Like, let's have a drink.
We're gonna go have a couple drinks. We're gonna float the bottle.
Yeah, we're gonna go to this shack on this beach next to our rocket and just drink. But yeah, I thought that was a cute little story. I'm trying to think. The other coolest trip was really the White Sands trip. So October 2021 was the first time I went to NASA like this. I went to Kennedy as a kid, but nothing at this level. And then the Artemis meeting, and then in the fall, I went to the lunar base team meeting at White Sands right before FabTech. So I guess another cool thing about that, when I walked into White Sands, I'm looking at the doors and I was reading the job descriptions. And I mean, I stopped in my tracks when I saw this one that said Pyrotechnics Officer of NASA. And I thought, man, where did I go wrong? Like, I could be a pyro officer at NASA. That sounds like a cool job. And that guy literally gets to blow stuff up like every day. But that right around the corner from that office was the lunar lander. There's a picture of me standing in front of this like copper lunar lander thing on my Instagram. That was at White Sands. And then there was the re-entry vehicle. So the one that looks like a little tiny rocket and it's me standing in front of the White Sands, I'm smiling so big because I had just inspected the welds.
How'd they
and
look?
I could have done those welds. I could have done them. Like, that's how, I mean, I'm not like the greatest welder, but I can TIG weld aluminum pretty well. I love welding aluminum. And I'm not like, maybe not your level, but I'm pretty damn good for the level I am at. And I could have made those welds. Like, they literally looked just like what I would have made, honestly. And I was really impressed that they sent a rocket like that with comparable to mine welds. And I was just like, yeah, I could have made this rocket.
Well, that's when I went and toured Kennedy Space Center. I mean, like, anywhere I go, whether it's the gas station or theme park or the airport, whatever, I'm always constantly looking at welds. Even before I was an inspector, I was always inspecting welds. Like, could I do better? Or, like, oh man, that's a good weld, or oh
Yeah.
damn, how'd that get past QC? But when I went out to Kennedy Space Center, I'm looking at all the welds just because it's like, that's kind of like a natural thing for me. And I'm noticing, I'm like, damn, like I've got students that can do better than this. Like, come on, this is supposed to go out of the atmosphere and back.
Yeah. No, I have seen some of that. I also think welding's come a long way because I mean TIG was pretty new when they started making these rockets, and
Yeah,
I
they used to
think
call it heliarc
metallurgy
back then.
Yeah. And they like the equipment wasn't what it is now. Like you can't control as much. But they were pretty good welds on that reentry vehicle I saw. I was actually impressed because I think they definitely realized, like I said, I think it was Werner von Braun that said like welding is arguably one of the most essential things to rocketry. So they have to be on their game, and that's why they have that custom welder.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that turned to friction stir because all the welds were breaking, I think, because the heat affected zones. And that's why they switched to friction stir welding because it's a colder, cooler process without as big of a heat affected zone. I mean, but the tool for it is ridiculous. It's literally 8 stories tall.
Jeez.
You know? And you have to clamp the rocket, and it just is one seam. So it's like a drill bit basically that goes up one direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it just zips it right up.
Yeah, it almost kind of looks like a spiral router bit. It just goes through and it just kind of runs through everything, but it's all linear. You can't do fillet welds.
Anything
it's good
else.
for, seams and butts and all that stuff, but not
Right.
fillet welds or anything like that. You can't do plug welds with it. So it's very, very limited. Also,
you can't exactly take that ridiculous piece of machinery and just send it up to space.
No, that's not happening.
I mean, like you have nowhere, like the torquing alone on the drill bit, I just imagine would have repercussions with nothing to hold against it, because it's like a drill bit. Imagine a drill bit in space. Like if you were floating around, like you would be the one spinning around the bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't like, everyone's like, oh, you should try a friction stir in space. And I think some companies are looking into it, but it's not going to be at the level they make rockets at, for sure. I can't imagine them sending that welder up to space. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, especially if you said like 80 feet tall. I mean, it's rather big.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess, do you have any other questions or anything you wanted to know about that I forgot to say?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything. It was pretty cool. I didn't know about your whole NASCAR background. I thought that was pretty neat as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes sense because where you're at.
Yeah. Like I said, I can't get away from racing. Like I've tried and it just doesn't work. The people like, you meet someone, you become friends if they happen to be on a race team. It's just a lot of that around here.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of inevitable, but I'm glad I got on the race team because like I said, I didn't want to just be a production welder. It was such a cool experience, especially having the team aspect.
Yeah.
And like, you do have to be precise and you do have to switch things on the fly. Like I said, one time I had like 6 months of parts ready and then they changed one rule. And I had to go refabricate like another 6 months of that, slightly different version of that same part. But it's cool. That's what I liked about it because it was like it could be different every day. Some things were the same, but some things were different. And then you just had like, I don't know, my car's running at the track this weekend. I wish I could have done both, but I know if you got to like pick something and go with it.
Yeah.
But now having my own shop, I haven't been getting too much work in yet. But I'm not that well set up. But thankfully, there's enough shops in the race park that have what I need. So I go to the shop across the street to use their bender and their shear. And I'm hoping to pick some more work up with them. They actually do some government work and experimental rockets and stuff.
Oh, that's neat.
The guy across so he's actually known to be one of the best welders in town. And the kid I went to school with works there too. It's like having a bunch of little brothers across the street. I get crazy Snapchats from them. Like, it's nice because I miss that about the race team. Like, we would throw bouncy balls at each other, just mess with each other, like that camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not a day would go by where someone wasn't messing with someone. And I'd like miss that because now I'm all by myself all the time.
Yeah, you're flying solo now for the most part.
Yeah. But I just miss like that shop camaraderie because I don't know, like you get it when you're in the shop. Anyone looking out in would be like, these guys are crazy. I just miss all that. I don't know. Hopefully I'll be with other welders again someday.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I mean, especially once you start getting further down the road with all this NASA stuff and, welding in space and coming up with different things. I mean, it's probably going to open up a lot of doors for you. You're going to meet a lot more people along the way.
Well, through the lunar base team alone, I have that metal powder project. I have 2 of those. And then somebody else wants to build a vacuum for lunar rover testing out in Vegas. And they need welders for that. And I'm going to have to learn pressure vessel welding, I think, and get certified. So I think that's going to be my next step, is how to build a vacuum. But I guess BattleBots are a lot like what they do for lunar rover testing. So one of the guys on my lunar base team thinks that we could do something like with BattleBots and scientific testing. So think like, like the monster truck, like the BattleBots rally on the weekend, but during the week, we're doing scientific research in the vacuum with all the rovers that they're testing. And I really want to be a part of that project. I'm hoping that it comes to fruition, because the guy that asked me is working on it, getting the grants for that. And I would actually have to go to California to build that. Out in LA, I think they're trying to make it like a public vacuum facility for anyone who wants to come, because right now, like if I wanted to go to NASA with my project, it's going to be 2 or 3 years away to get the vacuum. Because like I want to build a custom welder, and then I want to test it in the vacuum. And then, like I was telling you earlier, there's like international space, like lower Earth orbit is what it's called. And then there's the moon. And like lower Earth orbit is clean. There's, high vacuum, but there's no dust. But then on the moon, it's a dirty vacuum. So it's a totally different experience.
I've seen NASA's got like a massive facility that like a vacuum facility. And that's where they tested dropping a bowling ball and a feather at the same time. And they both hit the ground at the same time because there's no resistance for the feather. Yeah.
So
but it's like 100 feet in the air or better. I mean, like it's freaking huge.
That might be the one at Marshall. They just got a new one, and they have it.
It could be. I don't know. I seen a video like long time ago on this thing. There's some, I don't know, kind of like the guy that does the spokesperson for State Farm. The ball, or if one of the farmers insurance or whatever. It's kind of like that guy. But he was talking about, this vacuum chamber or whatever, and they were doing all these tests and experiments and stuff in there, and they were able to drop a feather at the same speed as a bowling ball because it's vacuum. There's no resistance whatsoever.
That's so cool. I've seen that video.
And it takes like days for it to, for them to vacuum the entire chamber out. It's pretty impressive.
Part of my research, I had to go through like what it takes to get your equipment tested in the vacuum. And for metal specifically, it is so much extra work. You have to like off gas it, which you probably know what off gassing is. You get to off gas the metal before you can even put it in the chamber. And those are all things that are going to have to happen in space too, if we're doing metal work up there. But either way, to get in those facilities, you have to have a Space Act agreement. You have to wait so many years to even get put on the list to go. And then you have to go get military clearance to go test your robot in a vacuum. So a couple people really think we need more like public vacuums for just anyone who wants to test their science project in a vacuum type of thing. But that's why we would pair it with the BattleBots, because they're already kind of doing similar things, and people seem to love BattleBots.
They're pretty neat to watch them.
Yeah,
compete.
but
I'll link you up with one of my other buddies. He does a lot of repairs on BattleBots.
Oh, okay, cool. No, that'll be a good person to know, because me and this other guy are trying to get this project up. But it makes sense, like in racing, they wrecked so many cars. They know exactly how that chassis needed to be before the Gen 7 car. There's so much safety went into that chassis, but it was like tried and true experience of wrecking cars went into that chassis. And I kind of foresee the same thing happening with the BattleBots, because fail fast, like Elon is doing. Because if you don't know what's going wrong, how can you fix it? But you got to do it to even know what's going wrong. And it's going to be the same thing with all these rovers that they're building. And I'm hoping one day that I have like a welder robot for them. It's like, say an axle breaks on one of these spots on the moon, like somebody's gonna have to fix that. And that's kind of why I got into the cobots, because I feel like you could just put that on a robot. Somebody would still need to be out in the field, like the moon, I guess, not the field.
You'd Yeah,
I don't know what
somebody
you
you set
call
up
the
there,
creator.
whoever you set up there is gonna be, yeah, they'd have to be pretty proficient with it.
There's also like nation days, you know, like you think this lag is bad, try welding on the moon from Earth with like a robot. That's going to be a challenge. Things like that. That's what I'm trying to learn about. And that's why I go to those lunar base team meetings, because things you'd never even think about, I'm learning about. And it's cool because I can wrap my head around what needs to happen. And I even had at that Artemis meeting, this guy from the human habitation, I think it was like the director of human habitation of the ISS, came up to me and was, actually, this is kind of funny. He couldn't figure out how like the astronauts could walk around the moon with the sun in their eyes. And I suggested a welding hood. I was like, I do that every single day. Like I stare at the sun for fun, basically. Like, and he was like, I never thought of that. So, and he's a PhD and he's really smart, but he's not a welder. So he didn't think to put together like, oh, I could just use a welding hood to block out.
Yeah, get you an auto dark lens.
And then he is the one who told me to my face, he said, we really need to train a welder to be an astronaut, because so far they've only trained astronauts to be like kind of a welder. And the way he described it to me is they took the equivalent of me in like my second semester of school and sent me to space to test all these welds. And now, granted, these are astronauts, so they're high performing individuals, but I feel like welding, you can be a PhD, like the, you know, biggest, you could be Einstein, but you might not be the best welder. Like that doesn't mean you're going to be the best welder. But
that's usually how it happens.
So they were forced to do these welds, and like they had enough experience to get by, but they didn't have the value of an experienced welder coming in and like the problem solving. And you can't get that out of 6 months to a year of experience. Like you need to have different situations and just lots of experience, I think, to be able to wrap your head around what needs to happen while you're up there. And there's a lot of like discrepancies in the experiments that I saw. One big one was they didn't even use the same parameters, but then they didn't tell us why they weren't the same. So that I think needs to be redone. So they did like, they sent samples on the ground and then they sent them to Skylab, and the cosmonauts performed the welds and they proved that they could do it and that it works, but then they didn't use the same parameters. So I think that's kind of a punch in the face for the research, because and they had no reasoning as to why they changed it. Because at least if they had said,
well, if you do change it, you definitely want to document it. And
exactly.
Then why.
So like, why did you change it? Those are the things we need to know. I mean, was it gravity? Like, were you feeling it? Like, was it melting too fast? Like, I just have so many questions. I have more questions than I have answers about it. But that's why I think we need to do more of it. We did this in the 70s, supposedly, and then just stopped. And then I believe the last welding in space experiment was supposed to be sent up on the Challenger, but it blew up on the launch pad. And then since then, I believe Maiden Space sent a laser or a MIG welder, like an automatic MIG welder type experiment on the ISS, and it showed promise. There's differences for sure. Like I think there's there. The heat transfer is totally different. And one good, I guess, example of that I have is I've read a book about meteorites, and meteorites are metal that took millions of years to cool. So just how giant crystals grow because they had, you know, all the time in the world to cool off. So that's what's going to be cool about space, is like, how are we going to cool the metal down? Like, what kind of metal can we make that's going to be different than on Earth? Because it's going to be different. We don't know how, but we do know that, I mean, metal's a crystal, and we have to kind of manipulate how the crystals settle down here, and it's going to be different up there, but it could mean a different kind of weld or metal, or I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen until we start doing it and playing around with, like, how does this metal cool versus, you know, what if we use this technique for cooling versus this other technique? That's when I think it's going to get really fun.
Yeah, I mean, and the best way to do that is to test it in a vacuum.
Well, the vacuum is only part of it, because gravity is another big part of it. So it's microgravity. It definitely is like the weld pool. So, I mean, when you're melting, like you think about the water in the ISS. So when you're welding, more just lay, in a blob. So things like that you're going to have to think about. And that's why I think we need more experienced welders up there with this experiment. I think we definitely need an experienced welder to go up with whatever experiment goes up. Because that way they can just make the changes. Like, okay, too hot. Let me like turn my volts rate down. But also let me add a heat sink and try to absorb the energy out to control how it cools. Just things like that, you know, they didn't do any of that. Like sometimes, I don't know, like you put like a steel block on your aluminum to kind of cool it faster.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that they didn't do. And even like stupid when I'm sewing, like we have a heat sink for like the fabric when you're pressing it. It's the same thing because it cools a certain way, but it's so important. And heat transfer is going to be a huge problem because it cools differently in space. I think it's I forget what it is off the top of my head. I think we have convection down here and it's conduction, or it's vice versa. They don't have that. So like it won't cool off by itself like it does down here. It's like when you're done welding your metal, it's like I know my aluminum is going to be cool in like 5 minutes if it's pretty thin. Now, if it's thicker, it might take a little longer. And like with steel, obviously, if I have an inch of steel, it's going to take like an hour to cool off. But if it's thin steel, it might take 20 minutes to get cold again. But in space, it's not going to do that. It's just going to be really hot and have nowhere to go. And that's one of the biggest problems with like arc welding and melting metal in space. And then another thing you have is like you can't do stick welding because the balls of fire become projectiles. Like they're going to go flying through space and create more junk that we don't need, or holes, you know?
Well, yeah, then you got a bunch of welders up there, you know, leaving rod stubs all over the place. It's going to be a mess.
Right. It's exactly. And like MIG welding is kind of the same. Like if it was an enclosed setting, but it still has those balls of fire that you don't want. And that's why I'm looking into more like TIG-like processes and cold welding, because they don't have the spatter. Because that will not work in space. Because there's nothing to catch it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, unless you could do like a spray transfer, but then again, you probably don't need gas while you're up there.
Well, that's one thing I don't know. Because they did use gas, I think, in the TIG welding experiments, but I wonder if you even need gas. So a lot of the space environments have gas that's abundant out there already. I just wish I could be up there trying it because I have so many like questions that I wish I had answers to. I mean, like, how would I cool this metal off in space? Or would this work if I just stuck my torch out, you know, in this vacuum in a certain environment? Because I think, you know, Earth has oxygen, but other places have different gases. So it's like,
yeah, they've got like argon, nitrogen, all that stuff in the atmosphere.
Like say you wanted to send, I don't know, a rocket to like a Jupiter moon, it might already have the ideal welding conditions that you would need. I just think it's interesting and we need to try it more. And I guess that's why it's turned into the fire that it has for me.
No, it's really cool to hear about the progress you're making and everything. I think, you know, given enough time and resources and stuff like that, you're going to be able to figure it out, especially, you know, having access to NASA facilities like anti-gravity or, you know, vacuum chamber, or, you know, a combination of the two. You're going to be able to figure things out a little bit more because, I mean, until you get into a space shuttle and go up there and actually start trying out experiments, you're really not going to know. So you're going to have to replicate it the best you can down here. Well, you can't replicate gravity. That's like the biggest thing. And like we already know welding can work. Well, you can get in a vomit comet, and they, you know, the plane where they launch you up and down and everything. They've done that actually, and there's not enough time to make a weld. It's like 5 seconds. Like you have to get 5 seconds, and then you're done. And it's just not enough time to get into the welding and like problem solving. Like 5 seconds. No, it needs to be up there floating around. Like I wish I could have a rocket that had its welding experiments. I know one of the things that I put like in the LSIC for the white paper for NASA was I think that we need to send like an unmanned rocket to the moon with a welder and the gas inside, and it expands and kind of welds from the inside out. And then you don't have to worry about the dust, and you have like a structure kind of ready to go with like a cobot or a welding robot. That's just one idea that I have. Like, how are we really going to get to the moon? Like, we're going to have something there, I think, before we get there. But then lower Earth orbit is so different than the moon. So they're two whole different things I have to think about.
because you don't have to worry about the dust and LEO, but they're going to want to build like hotels in space for people to go to. And they're trying to replace the ISS with something different soon because it has holes in it and they don't know how to repair the holes.
Mm-hmm.
But welding is front lines for repairing holes in metal. I mean, shocker.
Yeah, right.
But either way,
Well, just fab up a square plate or something and smack it against the hole and it should weld itself on
you
there.
would think. No, but they still haven't figured out how to fix it. It's like a big problem. But either way, the ISS is really old. And there's these things called solar volatiles. And they're just the particles emitted from the sun, high energy particles. And they're just breaking down the space station. So, metal fatigue is real. And then like the heat and the cold, they're affected by every single day. They go through the most drastic extremes because they go from super hot, super cold in a day. I mean, over wears the metal out, I'm sure. And a high radiation environment.
It's all thermal cycling.
So that's another thing So another thing I worry about too is like, how would it affect the weld you're doing? Because that's all electromagnetic fields being amplified near your weld. That's another big question. And just the volatiles, there's just solar volatiles out there. In addition to gravity, those are the things we can't replicate on the ground. You can replicate a vacuum any day, but you can't replicate the volatiles and the gravity. They've gotten better. Like they do have like gamma ray shooters, like they can shoot out gamma ray particles, things like that. But you'd have to get them for each volatile and shoot them all at the same time inside a vacuum to get like the results that I'm looking for. But you still can't recreate.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is. But they need to be doing that if they're trying to go to space. Because if that equipment can't hold up, like you have to get space qualified electronics to put on your rocket or your payload. It's like you can't just go to like Radio Shack and grab some wires and send that to space. Like you have to go to like it's called hard rad. They're like radiation hardened electronics that are designed for the space environment. I mean, they even have like space O-rings that are, flight qualified that you can't just go to the store and get.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing you have to think about is like these electronics going up there need to be space flight approved. And that's a whole different world of building equipment that most people don't have to get into. Like you don't have to worry about your iPad getting radiation, but up in space, you definitely do. There's so many things to consider. Like it's crazy. That's just what I think about all the time now. It's become kind of a problem.
But that keeps you up at night. Yeah, I was gonna say, that probably keeps you up.
It really does. I mean, but it's going to take a welder to put it together.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I'm very interested to see where you actually take it and what you come up with in, the research that you're doing. Yeah, keep me posted on it.
Yeah, I will. As soon as I can talk about it, I will be, shouting off the rooftops.
Yeah, get that patent in first.
Yeah, definitely. I have to call my lawyer, actually.
Well, cool. It's been awesome having you on the show. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? I know you're big on Instagram and stuff like that, or, whatever social medias you got.
Yeah, I'm the space welder by popular demand. Between NASA and FabTech, everyone was calling me the space welder. I had a different name, but I changed it because so many people requested it and everyone was calling me that. So I became the space welder. Well, cool. Maybe we can talk some more another time, but
yeah, hit me up whenever.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, it was great having you out. It's cool hearing about your story.
Thanks.
Oh, no problem.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you found the episode entertaining and educational. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps me out. I hope y'all have a great and safe week out there. And until next time, make every weld better than your last.